I sit in a mahogany-paneled law office while my husband's mistress smiles for the spoils, our mansion, our cars, our life, handed to her like party favors, and when my name finally appears on the page, it's only to pin a deed for a rotting shack to my chest like a joke I'm expected to applaud. The chair under me squeaks every time I shift, a small protest that ricochets off varnished walls and the sober faces reflecting in their shine. 3 weeks have passed since the crash. 3 weeks of sympathy bouquets browning at the edges and casseroles sweating through foil. 3 weeks since I chose a headshot that made Marcus look kinder than he was. Now I'm wedged between his parents at a table that smells like lemon oil and old money, beneath a portrait of a dead partner whose painted eyes ritualize my undoing. Mr. Harrison, wire-rimmed glasses, careful diction, hands mapped with liver spots, clears his throat and the room inhales with him. Patricia sits to my right in performative stillness, the kind you acquire in clubs that require legacies. Her gray hair is twisted into a chignon that could outlast a hurricane. She doesn't look at me. Richard commands the head of the table like a bench he owns, steel gray gaze skimming the documents, and the mistress with the same proprietary interest. Melissa wears black calculatedly, the neckline argumentative, the pearls on her throat familiar. They belonged to Marcus's grandmother, and I remember the velvet box he said needed cleaning for a while. That while has lasted exactly until this reading. The last will and testament of Marcus Jonathan Whitmore. Harrison intones, voice oiled for solemnity. He reads dates and notarizations with church-like cadence, then lapses into the accounting that cuts my life into labeled parcels and hands them away. The Rosewood Mansion with its curated art I picked for light. The Aspen House where I learned snow could be romantic. The S-Class, the X5, the investment accounts bundled with numbers that make grief seem negotiable. Each bequest lands at Melissa's elbow as if the law itself approves her posture. She dabs unspilled tears. A smile slips anyway, brief and feline. We were married, I hear myself say, as if facts can reverse a spell. California is a community property state. Richard finishes smoothly, voice honed by depositions. But these assets were acquired before the marriage or with inherited funds, separate property. He doesn't ask whether I have counsel. The omission is policy. Harrison clears his throat again, a prelude to the smaller sentence made to sound generous. To his wife, Sophia Marie Whitmore, the property located at 1847 Old Mill Road, commonly referred to as the Fisher Shack. Silence rearranges itself into laughter without making a sound. Melissa leans toward a friend I hadn't clocked. Of course there's a friend, and whispers in a tone engineered to travel. It fits her. Cheap and pathetic. Patricia's mouth doesn't smile, but something in her eyes says equilibrium has been restored. I stand so fast my chair kisses the wall. The wedding band in my palm bites a crescent that will purple later. I think of the Santorini photos Marcus texted at 2 a.m., promising sunsets we would drink like chilled wine on our 5th anniversary. This has to be a mistake, I say, because if I say betrayal, I will scream. Sit down, Sophia, Richard says, still not raising his voice. You're making a scene. The sentence lands with the weight of every dinner where I folded smaller so deals could grow larger. I sit. He adds, softly lethal, be grateful. He could have left you nothing. Gratitude tastes like a bitter almond. I swallow it whole and feel it harden. Harrison slides the key across the lacquer, attached to a cracked leather tag inked with a hand that doesn't care whether I can read it. The metal is pitted, colder than it should be in a room this climate-controlled. He notes that taxes are paid through year-end, 3 months, time portioned like inventory. California's vocabulary has always sounded like safety to me. Community property, transmutation, commingling, words that promise fairness if you obey them. Marcus arranged the map so that fairness led to a cliff. He dated titles before vows, sheltered money under granite surnames, and let me believe romance could rewrite law. I can already hear the story people will tell later, how a young wife learned the difference between gratitude and entitlement, how unlucky timing met sound estate planning. The mistress will be a footnote. The shack will be the punchline. I close my fingers around the key until the edges leave small half-moons. It smells faintly of wet iron and something like old pennies after a storm. The ring cuts deeper. I wonder absurdly if my skin will keep the mark even after I wash my hands. I catalog the room, the portrait's gilded frame, the fern in a brass stand, the discreet water carafe, and file away how power looks when it thinks it's permanent. Have fun in your shack. Melissa calls, sugaring her voice to keep it from dripping. I hear it's lovely this time of year. I don't look back. If I meet her eyes, I'll do something memorable and catastrophic. In the garage, concrete air coils around my ankles. I sit in my old Civic, palms flat on the steering wheel until the shaking becomes a manageable tremor. The sun slides across Los Angeles at its most flattering angle, gilding everything false. I should call my sister and let her pour tea I won't drink. Should curl into her guest room where the ceiling fan hums the lie that sleep is simple. Instead, I hold the key up to the light and watch rust glitter like threat. He once told me there were parts of the city he would never let me explore because they weren't safe. I accepted the sentence as tenderness because my heart was hungry for boundaries that felt like protection. Now it sounds like an admission. I type Old Mill Road into my phone. The map hesitates, then unspools a thin gray route that leaves boutiques and Pilates behind, and drifts toward chain link, warehouses, and the ragged edges where city and scrub negotiate uneasy borders. By the time I see the bullet-pocked road sign, early evening has thinned the light to a metallic wash, and crickets argue in the ditch. The shack squats in a clearing like a dare. Even from behind the windshield, I can tell the roof has given up. Boards are nailed over windows in crooked X's. Missing slats create square mouths of darkness. Vines pry at the siding as if time had fingers. I could drive on, tuck the key in a drawer, tell myself survival is discretion. The band and the key disagree. The lock resists, then surrenders with a groan that travels up my arms. The air inside is crowded with dust and a copper note that reminds me of coins warmed in a child's fist. My phone's light pours a cold cone over a wall carved with names, dates, and symbols, gouged deep enough to scar. Jam 1987. The deal is done. 1993. They know. Run. A family tree hacked in half. I search for Whitmore and hate myself for it. On a narrow shelf, beneath a mirror veined by a crack like lightning, someone tucked a photograph. 4 men in suits stand where I'm standing, champagne flutes mid-toast, a decade younger and already victorious. Marcus's smile is practiced. On the back, in bleeding ink, Phase 1. Complete. 2014. My screen flickers and dies without warning. The dark pulls closer. From beneath the floor, a measured tapping rises. 3 beats, a pause, 3 more, as if the house has lungs and a code. There's a leather notebook on the table I swear wasn't there before, warm under my palms as if a hand just left it. The first line is in Marcus's tidy print. Subject acquired. Surveillance begins tomorrow. Initial assessment, malleable. The room tilts, the ring bites, the key cuts. Somewhere in the dark, wood shifts and answers itself. Patient, deliberate. Sometimes the cheapest inheritance hides the most dangerous secret, like why someone started watching me when I was 17. I could go home and cry, or follow the key to whatever Marcus never wanted me to see, because sometimes the fastest way out of humiliation is straight through the place designed to scare you quiet. The elevator drops me into a downtown that is curated to within an inch of its life, all Edison bulbs and reclaimed wood and chalkboard menus that make coffee sound like an oath, the same corridor of taste Marcus once praised as proof our city had grown up. I steer the Civic past couples lingering beneath string lights and past storefronts where the glass is polished so relentlessly it reflects fantasies back at the people who can afford them. And I realize how expertly my marriage taught me to perform belonging, to dress my small-town edges in LA gloss, so I would look like one of the Charlotte. Reflections. The farther I drive, the more boutique becomes bargain, then boarded up, then bare, and as the last of the street musicians pack away their saxophones, the grid loosens, the sidewalks thin, and the streetlights begin to keep their distance like neighbors who intend to mind their own business. I take the long way because I am still deciding what it means to choose fear over shame, because shame begs me to reroute to my sister's bungalow where her porch swing creaks in sentences that end with Muti, you're safe now. While fear asks me to keep the promise I didn't make out loud in that law office when the key cut half moons in my palm, a promise that sounded like stop letting other people narrate you and start reading the ledger yourself. The GPS blue line flickers as if even the satellites are reluctant to supervise this detour, and I hear his voice from a winter night when we first drove the boundary where city turns to scrub, his hand warm on my knee as he said, "I'll never let you go there, Soph. Not safe." A sentence I credited to protective love because his hands were steady and the dashboard haloed his profile in movie light, though tonight, miles later, it lands like an admission of prior knowledge. I pass a tire yard where rubber mountains lean like slow waves, and a stucco church where a hand-painted sign promises redemption at 6 and 8, and a charter school whose chain-link fence holds dozens of faded ribbons tied by mothers who misunderstand how violence chooses addresses. And every block is a reminder that California's wealth is a coastline and a cliff at the same time. The air grows heavier and flatter, and then takes on that after-rain metallic tang, even though the sky is clear, and the rhythm of the road changes from the tidy hum of asphalt to a grind that vibrates up the steering column, the kind of surface that convinces shocks and struts to confess their age. I pass the last service station with a flickering open that blinks like a warning, and I do the comfortless math of minutes to help I will not call. By the time the sun slides behind the Sears Tower, the city forgot, and the purple hour melts into a bruised blue. The world has emptied of pedestrians and filled with silhouettes too tall to be bushes and too still to be men. And I take that as a sign the Civic and I have arrived at the coordinates of unadvisable choices. The Old Mill Road sign wears bullet holes like a constellation, and the turnoff is a ribbon of gravel threaded with weeds, and when my headlights skate across the clearing, I see the shack for the first time the way other people see me, a structure that once had hope in its lines, and now slumps as if it learned how to apologize for sagging. The roofline curves like a spine that has forgotten its instruction. The windows are bandaged in plywood except where wind has ripped the gauze, and the vines that Marcus used to call romantic in other neighborhoods look like hands here. Busy. Fingers testing the seams for weakness. It would be easy to keep the engine idling and narrate a reasonable plan that involves coming back with daylight, with a contractor, with paperwork that says condemned so I can pretend this place is unworthy of my attention. But the problem with humiliation is that it stains everything you try to salvage, and if I don't get out now, the shame of the law office will colonize my nights and rename my sleep. I kill the engine and listen as the quiet lands hard, that American edge quiet you only find between industrial zones and unincorporated woods, the kind where you hear your own keys clink and your breath miscount and a train cry 3 valleys away. The night smells like dirt and creosote and the metallic edge of a storm that isn't coming. And when the door's hinge complains, I flinch because even inanimate objects seem irritated by my arrival. I circle the structure once as if I know the vocabulary of buildings and can decode a sagging corner or the way a foundation tilts its jaw. What I actually read are the small evidences of human maintenance: cigarette butts gathered in a windless corner, carelessly crushed, boot prints that are newer than the last rain, a beer can wedged under a step to stop a wobble, which tell me this place is not abandoned so much as selectively visited. I hold the key up to the porch light that is only a memory, and the teeth catch a beam from my phone and throw orange back at me. And I think of the way Mr. Harrison's glasses reflected the chandelier when he said, "properly executed," as if wills are ever merely about signatures. And I decide that I am done being curated, that I am done wearing outfits chosen for photographs and opinions chosen for rooms I don't belong in, that this is the errand where I write my own captions in a hand that won't look elegant but will be mine. When the key slides into the lock, I half expect it to snap because the metal is rough and my grip is slick, but it seats with a stubborn certainty and turns with a sound like an old jaw, opening to answer a question no one asked for years, and the door yields a few inches and then sticks where swollen wood meets swollen wood, and I put my shoulder to it, and the whole frame stutters like a surprised animal, and then exhales, and the smell that arrives is not single, it is a chord. Dust and damp and a sourness that suggests wet cardboard and something faintly sweet like the last note of spilled gasoline. The phone's torch throws a narrow cone that makes everything beyond it wider, and a moth navigates that small universe like a drunk pilgrim, and my breath fogs a fraction even though the night is warm, and I realize the cold is not weather but scale. For a moment I stand on the threshold because thresholds are the last places you can lie to yourself and still sound pragmatic, and I run through the inventory of reasons to leave. The roof that looks like a shrug, the floor that looks like a lawsuit, the unsupervised darkness that looks like an alibi for every bad thing you ever read in a local news brief. And yet, behind those reasons, something older than fear taps its foot, something like the impatience I felt when Marcus took the long way through explanations, something like the irritation I felt when he called me kid in front of partners, and that something insists that agency is not a speech, it is a door you open even while you are rehearsing caution. My sister will be furious if I tell her, and Elena's fury is a safety net, and I promise myself I will call her the second I step back outside, because bargains with yourself are the currency of courage. I cross the line where outside ends and inside begins, and the wood surrenders a groan that travels the rafters and returns to me as a question, and the dust reacts like a startled flock, filling my light with glitter that looks celebratory until you breathe it, and the first step flexes, then forgives, and the second step does the arithmetic on my weight and my choices, and decides to wait a minute, and I catalog the details like a journalist whose editor insists on 5 senses. The way the air carries a cold cellar memory, though there is no cellar yet revealed. The way the long room echoes small sounds into bigger ones. The way the dark corners persist even when I swing the light, maintaining boundaries with the stubbornness of secrets. There are shapes under sheets, and the sheet color is the gray of neglect, and the door frames hold their paint like old men hold grudges, peeling slowly but refusing to surrender. A wind threads the boards and makes a cheap chime out of a dangling nail, and I tell myself the noise is nothing, the draft is normal. The skittering I think I hear is a mouse or the contraction of a cooling beam, because bravery is often a practice of plausible stories you tell your nerves until the evidence interrupts. Marcus once told me that buildings remember hands, and I wonder whose hands this place remembers, and whether it has learned how to keep confidences, and whether the key in my pocket is an invitation or an indictment. I move deeper because stillness is always a prelude to either discovery or retreat, and I am equally unprepared for both. But I came here to interrupt a narrative that paints me grateful for scraps. An interruption is an action that works better close. The door gives under the key. Inside, the air smells like dust and old pennies, and before I can rationalize the metallic taste rising on my tongue, something in the darkness answers my arrival with a sound that knows my name. The walls are carved with dates, initials, and warnings. They know, run. And the moment my light touches the gouged letters, the room feels less abandoned and more like a witness trying to talk through splinters. My beam glides over wood that has been handled like a confession booth, each cut deliberate, some shallow scratches that read like practice. Others hack so deep the grain splays into ragged mouths, the kind that would swallow a fingertip if I traced them. There are initials entangled with dates that jump decades, clusters of symbols that look like someone tried to hide meaning inside math, and arrows etched toward corners as if directions were a way to survive. The phrase that stops me is angry and fresh, the edges still pale where the knife bit yesterday or last week. They know. Run. The floor answers with a low vertebral crack as if the building is shifting its weight to listen, and I realize I have been holding my breath long enough to make my ribs complain, that I am already negotiating with an old fear I have no intention of honoring tonight. I move slow because the house demands it, because every board seems to want an introduction before it agrees to carry me, because speed here is a language the structure might reject. The groans arrive in a grammar I start to recognize. The entryway's theatrical creak is for show. The long room's measured whine is age. The corridor's short, impatient chirp is warning. And under it, a separate rhythm emerges, a 3-beat knock from beneath the floor that pauses and repeats, steady like someone teaching a metronome how to lie. My flashlight jitters, a consequence of my hands not believing my mouth's claim that this is fine, and the beam skates across dust motes that behave like snowfall under a stage spotlight, beautiful until you remember you are breathing them. The fireplace is a throat stuffed with paper bones, but the fragments disintegrate when I try to read them, so I save my curiosity for the mantel where a crooked frame still hangs by one nail, glass long gone, the cardboard back warped by damp. Tucked into the frame like a dare is a photo whose gloss hasn't surrendered to mildew, and when I slide it free, the past smiles with champagne teeth. Marcus stands in front of this shack as if it is a ribbon-cutting, suit-pressed, tie knotted with the precision he reserved for boardrooms, flanked by 3 other men in expensive armor that does not forgive. The date on the back sits beneath a caption in block letters, Phase 1 complete, and the ink has bled a little, which makes the words look relief wet. I hear my own voice in a memory asking him why he hated dirt roads, his answer jaunty with charm, and I feel the floor's breath change under my feet as if the house appreciates the joke I missed for years. When the photo pulls my light toward a table draped in the same gray that covers everything, I start to lift the sheet and something stirs under the boards again. A knock that relocates, now under the far wall, now beneath the doorway, now under my toes, and my calves go tight as if preparing to leap. I yank the sheet anyway, because agency has to look like something, and the table does not hold a single object politely waiting. It holds dozens of photographs fanned and piled in layer like a deck, an impatient dealer. Kept shuffling between hands. My face stares up from different years that my brain can identify by hair length and apartment paint and the childish optimism of my posture. There I am at my high school graduation with a thrifted dress that refused to fit my shoulders, at a campus job holding a tray of scones, at a jog near the reservoir where the chain link fence always rattled even when the wind slept, at a grocery aisle comparing unit prices like a religion. Some are long lens from the opposite side of a street, some so close I can count the blue flecks in my irises, and each has a date stamped bottom right in red, a surveillance calendar that begins long before the charity gala, where I thought fate introduced me to a man whose smile felt like a decision. It would be easier to scream and let the sound do the thinking, but what comes is a quiet that hurts, a pressure that starts behind my sternum and presses outward until my skin feels a size too small, because there is no polite architecture that can house the revelation that your life has been documented by strangers who knew your schedule better than you did. I shuffle the photos into a chronology that proves planning, and the paper edges bite my cuticles like the metal key did earlier, and I wonder whether shock can be measured by the neatness of your stacks, because I am organizing my own theft to make it less obscene. A scuff arrives from the hall, but when I swing the light, the doorway is a rectangle of dark that looks back without blinking. I pivot to the table, ready to gather everything, and discover that gathering is a false verb here because an object exists that was not present 30 seconds ago. A leather notebook has appeared where there was only wood and dust, the cover the color of dried blood and the spine still stubborn. My name is embossed on the front in gold that has dull too old coins, not stamped like stationery you buy with wedding gift cards, but pressed with a hand that wanted the letters to bruise. Every instinct I possess, learned from mothers and movies, says, leave it. But instincts are also the stories that kept me curated, so I open to the first page, and my husband's handwriting, known as intimately to me as the shape of his shoulder under a sheet, spells a sentence that fractures the floor beneath my feet more effectively than any rot. Subject acquired. Surveillance begins tomorrow. The entries do not care that I am a person reading them. They proceed with the unsentimental cadence of a quarterly report, bulleting my habits, my takeout preferences, my tendency to linger at the end of phone calls, my years-old injuries that ache when the air pressure drops, my fear responses cataloged with a clinician's accuracy and a marketer's intent. Strategies that read like scripts for how to make me feel chosen, how to isolate me from any voice that questioned the fantasy, how to make the rescue I had been rehearsing since adolescence appear to arrive in a tuxedo. There are date-stamped notes about test conversations to see if I would accept certain versions of truth. There are references to R, insisting I am perfect for the role. There are paragraphs that diagram the way to build gratitude into loyalty and loyalty into silence. I keep turning pages even as my pulse hammers in my jaw, because once you admit your love might be a project plan, it is impossible to stop reading the fine print. The room participates in my audit with small sounds that stack into language, the floorboards offering tired protests, the rafters clearing their throats, the wind slurring its consonants at the gaps. And then, as if the house decides patience is a finite resource, the interior doors begin to slam in sequence. One, then the next, then the next. A clap, clap, clap that races down the corridor and yanks my nerves into a sprint. The phone's light wobbles because my hands are negotiating between fight and run, and the notebook is heavier now, either with information or consequence, and I shove it under my jacket because sometimes theft is self-defense. The final door at the end of the hall slams so hard dust leaps from the frame like birds flushed from brush, and the echo barrels back down the spine of the house and collides with me at the threshold. I do not plan the bolt, my body chooses it, and the porch surrenders me tonight with a splinter that snags my sleeve and a step that tries to memorize my weight. Gravel scatters like thrown rice beneath my shoes as I race for the Civic, and in the side-eye slice of the broken window, I catch a tall silhouette, not moving, not threatening with motion, threatening with stillness, the kind of posture that says the watcher is unafraid of being seen. The engine coughs like an old smoker before it obeys, and as the beams lift across the shack, the figure does not duck or fade. It watches and lets me know that being allowed to leave is not the same as getting away. Every interior door slams in sequence. My courage collapses into speed, and as I flee with the notebook pressed to my ribs, a tall silhouette holds its ground in the broken window like a promise that this place is not finished with me yet. Daylight makes the shack less haunted and more criminal, as if the sun has swapped ghosts for evidence and invited me to stop being afraid and start taking inventory. Morning burns off the night's damp, and with it the excuses I have used to delay action. The shack sits where I left it, but stripped of darkness it looks less like a dare and more like a cover story. Sagging boards that were never meant to keep anyone out. Vines knitted to suggest abandonment, while the ground shows fresh tracks in splayed ovals of mud. Elena stands shoulder to shoulder with me in the rutted drive, her jaw set in the way that used to scare off kids who tried to cheat at Foursquare. She has a thermos in one hand and my elbow in the other, the combination of caffeine and sisterly ballast I didn't know I needed until she appeared on my porch with both. Tom moves the way practical men move around structures they don't trust, palming studs, tapping trim, testing a post with one blunt knuckle and listening to what the wood is willing to admit. From the road, a cyclist in a neon jacket rolls past and looks twice, the kind of American glance that registers trouble but doesn't stop. Out here, trouble belongs to whoever owns the property line. Elena keys open her notes app like she's clocking in. "We are not heroes, we are careful," she says, and this is why she is my person. She has room in the same sentence for bravery and caution without accusing either of weakness. Tom wobbles one of the porch posts and steps back when the top plate sighs. "You can go in behind me," he says, and if something flexes, we reverse. No arguing with physics. Inside, daylight reframes the place. Beams of sun thread the gaps, carrying a meteorology of dust that turns in lazy columns. The smell is layered, old sawdust, mouse, damp paper, and that metallic tang I noticed last night now softened into coin and rust. The room where the carved warnings live has lost its theater but gained the authority of records. Every gouge in the wall looks like someone tried to notarize a fear. I gesture toward the long interior wall. "Does this feel right to you?" I ask Tom, because rightness here is math, not vibe. He pads the perimeter, counting under his breath, head angled as if listening for a lie. "From outside, this room should be 3 feet deeper," he says finally, thumbing the baseboard. "Somebody stole space." Elena crouches, running the flat of her hand along the floor like she's checking for heat. Her palm pauses at a section where the boards change pitch beneath pressure, a click rather than a groan. "Here," she says, and Tom is already opening his tool bag, offering me ear protection I decline, and handing Elena safety glasses she accepts with theatrical gratitude. A pry bar kisses the seam, and the first board lifts with a sound like fabric tearing, then another, until a rectangle yawns open on a cavity that doesn't match the shack's rotted DNA at all. Below us, a ladder drops into a space that catches light and throws it back clean. The air rising up is cool and dry, machine smell and concrete, a basement that never met weather. I descend second because even when fear speaks fluent English, I refuse to let it narrate. The ladder is new enough to grip, industrial aluminum with knurled rungs that bite rubber soles, and the shift from sunlight to the cellar's bluish utility lights feels like stepping into a different jurisdiction. The walls are poured concrete with expansion joints neat as scars. A dehumidifier hums in the corner like a well-behaved appliance. Metal shelving runs the length of 2 walls, and the shelves aren't jammed with junk. They're organized like a prosecutor's dream. Banker's boxes, and labeled in block caps, dates aligned, code words printed on spine tabs in a tidy hand. A workbench commands the far wall, and on it lie tools that belong to certain agencies and certain eras. Analog tape recorders with reels asleep at their posts, A spread of mini cassettes in plastic coffins, a nest of old Nokias and flip phones lined up like fossils in a museum drawer, a handheld device for tapping landlines, receivers with silicone ear cups, and a nest of Cokes and RJ-CLM. El Tiaven that looks like a taxidermied serpent. Tom exhales a sound I have only heard in football bars in overtime. Someone spent real money to make rot look like set dressing, he says, flicking a switch that brings a second row of fluorescents to life with a staggered pop. The light reveals a corkboard with a charm bracelet of SIM cards pinned like moths. In the corner, a vault of vintage cameras from decades that don't agree with each other, an SLR with electrical tape over the brand name, a brick of a camcorder with a choir of dead batteries, a shoebox full of SD cards with dates sharpied in tiny numbers. The aesthetic is federal, but the discipline is private. Elena finds the shelf that belongs to me like a hunting dog catching wind. A white sticker becomes a beacon. Acquisition Sophia M. Maiden name in full, 2008, 2015. The box is heavier than paper should be, which makes sense the moment I lift the lid. On top sits a psychological profile, written in polite bureaucratic, the kind that never raises its voice while carving you open. The pages summarize me as if I were a product to be brought to market. Abandonment pattern following parental split, responsiveness to structured praise, rescue fantasy indicators, risk mitigation through controlled introduction of novelty. Beneath that are photocopies of my college transcripts, with grades highlighted like red flags, my ER intake forms from a sprained wrist in 2011, my dental x-rays that show a crooked wisdom tooth I never pulled because funds were other places. There are call logs from numbers I recognize and numbers I don't, my email metadata bound with a rubber band that crumbles when I touch it, and photographs that didn't make last night's upstairs table, printed contact sheets where my life is smiles and timestamps. Jesus, Elena says softly, and I look up to see her gripping the edge of the shelf, knuckles white. She has known every bad haircut I have endured, every big choice I have botched, every good man I have doubted, and every bad one I have defended, and still this takes something from her. Tom has moved 2 shelves over and gone very still. When I reach him, he's staring at money, not bills like the kind that spill out of vending machines, bills old enough to look wrong. The bands are stamped by banks that got bought by banks that got bought by banks. The paper has that thick linen chew to it, and the serial numbers march in sequence like soldiers. He pulls one stack apart with the reverence of a man in a church pew, and the smell of old cash spills out, mildew flirting with ink, history pretending to be fabric. This isn't mattress money, Tom says, and for once he sounds less practical and more awed. It's staged, like someone saved series by the run, like the kind of cash you see attached to a case file. He sets the bundle back with careful fingers and points at a second box on the lower shelf marked OPS Fin. Ledgers, wire slips, bearer bonds, void. I don't open it. Not yet. I am vibrating with the urge to take everything and the knowledge that touching anything is a declaration I cannot unsay. We work our way along the shelves, and with every box a picture clarifies. There are binders labeled with shell company names that look like they were generated by a random noun machine. Cypress Vale Holdings, Bolster Peak, River Lamp Partners, and each tab to property parcels and loan notes. There are memos initialed RW, with directives that read like policy when they are threats, and there are lists of phone extensions paired with nicknames I recognize from holiday parties where men pretended a bar was privacy. The room has the cool patience of a museum and the coiled energy of a crime scene that hasn't been disturbed enough to bleed yet. I slide my file, my life, back into its coffin and press the lid flat as if that could reseal it. Elena squeezes my shoulder and says my name in the tone that used to bring me home from the playground. We document, we don't disturb, she says, and pulls out her phone. Tom, used to job sites where photos decide insurance, angles lights, and holds evidence cards, he cuts from a manila folder jury-rigging chain of custody with contractor craft. We shoot labels, we shoot contents, we shoot close-ups of serial numbers until my eyes cross. We do not touch more than we have to, and even our restraint feels like interference. The sound arrives as a tremor through the ladder, a vibration that climbs bone into thigh. Footsteps above us, measured and heavy. the weight of a man with confidence in his jurisdiction. Another step, closer to the hatch, another, and dust frets loose around the opening, drifting down in a lazy veil. Elena lowers her phone without being told. Tom's mouth flattens into a line that admits worry but refuses to honor it. The footsteps stop directly over the cutout rectangle, and the ceiling becomes a held breath. Then a voice drops through the opening like a polished coin sliding across the table, smooth, assured, familiar enough to make my stomach reject gravity. "I know you're there, Sophia." Richard's drawl makes my name sound like a file he's closing. "Come up, we need to talk." The ladder vibrates under a last deliberate step. The dust above us hangs as if waiting for orders, and Richard's voice floats down through the hatch like an invitation with a blade hidden inside it. "Your maiden name may be Chen, but your mother's maiden name was Fisher." We climb, Elena first because she refuses to let me go alone, Tom behind her with the crowbar held low, and I come up last with my phone set to record even as my hands shake. Richard waits in the center of the room like a docent in a private museum, one palm resting on the carved wall as though he's greeting an old friend. The daylight makes him look younger and crueler. Two men flank him in tailored suits that hide holsters in the drape. Their eyes do the work their hands don't. He smiles at the ladder opening as if we've arrived on time for an appointment he never bothered to calendar. The shack's rot, its soft sinking floor, the vines fingering the windowsills. He wears all of it like cologne. "We'll keep this civilized," he says, and the word lands in my mouth with a metallic taste. He gestures lazily at the markings cut into the wood. "First girl I kissed signed these walls. The boys used to sneak beer up here. The town was small then, and a man could buy the quiet he needed." He looks at me like I'm the noisy exception. Elena shifts, bristling, but I touch her forearm and keep my posture steady. Richard takes in the small details, mud on my knees from the ladder, dust on my sleeve, the thread of fear in my voice I can't smooth out, and decides to enjoy himself. He names people like playing cards, the DA who leases a waterfront house for $1, the judge whose vacation is always anonymous patronage, the police captain who drops poker money with a hand too good to be luck. "You brought your contractor," he notes, and I watch the way Tom hardens without moving. "Practical. You always did prefer men who fix." "What do you want?" I ask, because when a man inventories his influence out loud, he is either negotiating or auditioning for a confession. "I want you to stop," he says simply, then softens the syllables into something almost kind. "Your husband made a mess. Sentiment does that to smart men. I intend to clean up without breaking the porcelain." He steps toward me, and the air thins. "Your maiden name may be Chen, but your mother's maiden name was Fisher. Joseph Fisher's bloodline, your bloodline." The room tilts. The carved warnings lose their shape and become wood again. I hear Elena's breath go sharp beside me. Tom says nothing, which is what good men say when they understand commentary is both dangerous and inadequate. Richard enjoys my vertigo, then guides it. "Your mother's family severed ties. New name, new city. But blood, Sophia, is a ledger that reconciles. When we discovered your existence, we had a choice. Buy the heir or bury her." His smile never touches his eyes. "I chose mercy. We married you into management." Every month of my marriage flips over like a photograph and develops a second image in its emulsion. "Containment," I say, and the word tastes like I have bitten my tongue. He nods, pleased that I've caught up. "Marcus was supposed to keep you loved enough to be loyal and sheltered enough to be harmless. He could have done it forever if he had kept his head." The grief that lives in my chest flares hot, and I hate that he sees it. "You killed your son," Elena says, the sentence fierce and unbelieving at once. Richard tilts his head like a man listening to an off-key note. "He killed his future," he corrects, bored with the morality play. "I grieved as a father and acted as a steward. The town thrives, crime rates halved, schools funded, hospitals built. You want a villain because it flatters your story. I am an accountant." His hand opens and closes as if counting air. "Liabilities are neutral until they are not." He turns and wanders the room, collecting my gaze and setting it down like a paperweight on details he wants me to keep. "By walking into this property, you ratified the will. By opening my boxes, you handled contraband. Your fingerprints are now the fingerprints on money the feds would love to catalog. Should this become public, prosecutors will find the narrative they need. The humiliated widow who ransacks her husband's past for leverage, the secret heir who discovers a payday and can't resist counting. He nods at my phone. By the way, your recording app failed 2 minutes ago. Service out here is unreliable. I check the screen and see the red light dead, the timer frozen, the battery icon suddenly thin. Panic scribbles under my ribs and I drag a breath through it. Tom's jaw ticks as he steps closer to Elena, reading escalation the way he reads load-bearing walls. Richard watches us like a chess player indulging pawns who believe in democracy. You're worth more alive than dead, he says, and the statement lands with the weight of a restraining order. You notarize our legitimacy. Should anyone question a transfer from the 80s or a missing man from a headline, we produce you, the grateful heir, the Whitmore bride, and the story goes still. And if I don't play your grateful heir? I ask, hearing in my own voice a steadiness I didn't order. He shrugs. Then we adjust. I prefer assets that comply. But the world is full of assets. Ask Marcus. The name is an instrument in his hands, and he uses it to test for weaknesses in my frame. Something in me that used to bow now locks. I make a show of considering. You said you wanted civilized, I tell him. Civilized people document agreements. I step backward toward the ladder without looking down, because I know where it is, the way a child knows where the edge of the pool is without opening her eyes. Give me space to think, I'll call you. He laughs softly. If you run, you'll trip into your own case file. If you fight, you'll learn the price of ambition. He flicks 2 fingers and one of the enforcers opens the door like a maitre d'. Be tidy on your way out. We'll be in touch. We descend without speaking, the ladder ringing faintly under our weight like faulty chimes. The cellar's cool breath closes over us and my knees go weak with the relief of concrete. Elena grabs my shoulders. We go to the FBI, she says, and the ferocity in her tenderness makes my eyes sting. Tom is already moving to the shelves with purpose, scanning spines like he's alphabetizing danger. He wanted us to touch, he says. So we don't. We shoot. We back up. We move. I turn because I need to do one thing that is not reaction but choice, and the choice drags me to a binder I didn't see before. Black, scuffed, unremarkable, except for the way it refuses dust. My fingers stick to the cover, and when I open it, the first page is a title and a date, both typed and slightly crooked. Executive Actions, 1987, present. The paper smells faintly of carbon. Each entry is a transaction written in bloodless nouns, yet the verbs thunder in the negative space. Containment, pressure, relocation, liquidation. Names I know from plaques on buildings and obituaries in glossy programs line up with dates and amounts that read like ransoms, like bribes, like salaries for murder. My eyes skid and then catch on a line near the bottom of a page that looks newer, the font crisper, the ink darker. Termination order. Number 47. Subject, Marcus Jonathan Whitmore. Reason, security breach potential whistle. Method, vehicular incident. Status, complete. The floor tilts again and I lurch, hand splaying over the paper as if I can smudge it into fiction. Elena's breath hitches, a sound that will live in my bones like weather. Tom swears under his breath, the word as soft as prayer. I turn the page because I have to know whether I still exist in any way I recognize. The next entry has my name. Termination order number 48. Subject, Sophia Marie Whitmore, née Chen. Reason, inherited liability. Method, TBD. Status, pending review. Somewhere above us the ladder shivers as if a decision has been made, and I close my fingers over the ledger because if my future is going to be in order form, I intend to edit it before someone signs. The ledger names Marcus's death as a termination order, and mine is next. I don't remember climbing the ladder. I remember the scrape of the rungs against my palms and the taste of copper in my mouth, as if the shack itself has bled into me. Elena sees my face and doesn't ask. Tom reads the room like he reads drywall and starts moving with quiet efficiency. We pack the ledger first, wrapped in a trash bag inside my canvas tote. The photos go into manila folders. Tom calls out serial ranges from the cache, and Elena writes them on a ripped panel of banker's box with a contractor's pencil that smudges like ash. Outside, the day has turned hard and white, sun glaring off the hood of Tom's truck. The woods on either side of the dirt lane look like watchers. When the first black SUV noses from the trees, not fast but sure, Tom is already sliding. Behind the wheel, already swearing under his breath in a cadence that sounds like a metronome. I climb in with the tote, Elena with the files, and Tom throws the truck into reverse so we kick gravel into the SUV's grill before it finishes deciding we're prey. He drives like a local who knows which potholes are decoys and which ones will swallow an axle. Cuts left at a stand of birch that looks like a curtain, then right across an unmarked drainage cut that makes the SUV hesitate. "Hold on," he says, which in Tom speak means he's about to make a choice we can't unmake. He jumps us over a curb onto a frontage road, slots into Saturday traffic like we belong there, and uses minivans as shields while the black glass behind us multiplies in my side mirror like a bad decision. Downtown rises with its brick facades and banners for fall festivals. The town square is hosting a farmer's market, all canvas tents and bluegrass from a portable speaker. We thread it and burst onto Broad, where the Coastal Tribune sign still uses serif letters and pride. I can see Jenny's 10-year-old Prius in the second row, bumper sticker that says sunlight is a disinfectant, so I know she's inside. Tom brakes hard. We spill out. I don't feel my legs as we sprint the lobby, past posters of Pulitzer clippings and middle school photo contests, up the stairs to the newsroom hum that sounds like caffeine and deadlines. Jenny Martinez looks exactly like a problem you want on your side. Hair in a messy bun that means business, glasses smudged, sleeves shoved to elbows. When she sees the tote and the fear on my face, she doesn't waste a second on theater. "What do you have?" she asks, already clearing a table, already shouting for interns to plug in scanners, already telling IT to spin up an air-gapped server because nothing touches the cloud, nothing, not one bite. We take over a long table that still has dried coffee rings. Elena fans photos. Tom dumps the cereals board. I pull out the ledger like a priest lifts a relic. We divide and conquer. Jenny's fingers fly across her keyboard as she photographs each ledger page with a DSLR tethered to a local drive. 2 copy editors who swore off weekends reappear with legal pads and hot coffee, taking down names, dates, methods, doing what newsrooms do when the story breaks in the room. They turn shock into verbs. A features reporter collects background clips on Joseph Fisher. Photo is already on the phone to a stringer who can shoot the shack. The police scanner spits chatter in the corner. Units responding to a rollover on Route 6, a domestic, then nothing, then a silence I can't interpret. For 10 minutes we are ahead. Then the erase begins. At first I think it's a glitch. The preview in Jenny's camera stalls. The progress wheel on the drive freezes. A file folder blinks and vanishes. Then the second hard drive drops offline. It shouts from the glass fishbowl. Our offsite just went dark. A copy editor swears and shakes a mouse like it owes him rent. Jenny's eyes flick to mine, steady, unblinking, and then to her phone. In the space of a breath, uploaded photos evaporate from backup. Emails bounce. The air-gapped server staggers like it's being smothered from the outside in. Air-gap's not helping if the room is compromised. IT says, too calm. Their scrubbers are coming through any open port we touched in the last hour. It's not magic, it's money. The kind that buys the kind of access you never see, the kind that lives in the seams between agencies and vendors, the kind that can make a document disappear so completely it starts to feel imagined. I clutch the ledger like it has a pulse. Jenny snaps her fingers at a producer. Print while we can, hard copies, every page. A laser printer screams to life like a fire alarm and begins to spit paper at a pace that feels like hope. My phone buzzes and the message is so ordinary it stains everything around it. You have 1 hour to return everything. After that, Termination Order 48 expands to include your helpers and their families. Please don't be foolish. R. The newsroom noise drops away behind the sentence, as if sound itself has stepped back to make room for dread. Elena reads over my shoulder and goes pale, in a way that makes me remember middle school sleepovers and the way she'd whisper, "It's okay" on nights when storms sounded like footsteps. Tom's jaw tightens into a line that means he's done asking permission. Jenny reads, inhales once, exhales through her nose, and turns to the room. We're past emails. We go analog and we go broadcast. She points at the old studio corner they use for election hits. Patch me to the control room. If they own the servers, they don't own the airwave contracts. We break in live. Producers pivot like dancers. Lights swing on their poles. A makeup artist appears out of thin air and dabs the shine from Jenny's forehead while she keeps typing. The red on AR sign is dark, and then it's not. A countdown appears on a monitor, and I realize we are about to kick a hornet's nest on purpose. Through the windows we can see the SUVs arranging themselves in the lot like chessmen. Men in blazers that don't wrinkle stand with their hands folded in front of their belts as if to prove they aren't touching weapons they definitely have. Richard doesn't show his face. He doesn't need to. He's already in the circuitry. He's already elbow deep in the public square. An intern whispers that local police just rolled up, then rolled away, orders on the radio changing mid-sentence. Jenny lifts her chin at the camera and the room inhales as one organism. For the record, she says to me as a tech clips a mic to her collar, this is going to get loud. Once we light it, there's no putting it back in the bottle. You sure? I look at Elena, who has her hand on that first stack of printed pages. Like a promise. I look at Tom, who has positioned himself by the newsroom doors with the kind of stillness that warns wolves they've made a miscalculation. I look down at the ledger and see Marcus in the negative space between letters. 5 years of laughter and fights and long Sunday mornings translated into one cold line that reads, status, complete. What I feel is fear, yes, and then something else. Rage distilled into resolve. I think of the shack's splintered warnings. They know. Run. And how the last word changes tense when you decide to turn around. Jenny nods once, understands what I can't say without breaking, and faces the lens. The director counts down with fingers, 5 to 1, silent, sure. The on-air light flares to life like a fuse. We choose to go live before anyone can pull the plug, because if the truth is going to burn, it will burn in public where everyone can see who's holding the match. If they can erase files, they can't erase a live feed thousands are watching. The red light warms like a small sun, and Jenny's voice slips into that measured cadence America trusts at dinner. The syllables deliberate without dragging, the spine of each sentence reinforced with a fact you can touch. She opens with the simplest proof because television demands objects. This is the ledger, this is page 23, this is a date and a dollar figure and a signature that repeats across deeds, loans, and sham charities. This is a photocopy of a cashier's check stub, and these are serial numbers Tom has handwritten from bundles we pulled this morning from a concrete room under an address my husband willed to me with a smile I now understand was insurance disguised as cruelty. Jenny angles the document toward the camera so viewers can freeze frame, zoom, argue at their coffee tables, and the studio mic catches the papery rasp as she turns the page, a sound like old leaves surrendering. She does not make me perform my grief or my fear. She lets me be the corroborating witness who points to the penciled margin note and reads the part that curdles the throat, the line that calls Marcus a liability to be resolved, and assigns me a number I didn't know I could become. I describe the carved warnings on the walls, the tap-tap under the floorboards, the photographs of my life taken from distances that prove lenses can be taught to love patterns more than people. Elena, off camera, feeds documents across the desk with the quiet competence of sisters who have lived through other storms, and Tom stands beyond the frame with shoulders squared toward the newsroom doors as if his body can veto interruption. Phones across the city light up with the cheap drama of push alerts. Comments cascade in caps and disbelief. A high school civics teacher screenshots the first 5 pages and starts a thread explaining shell companies with bar napkin metaphors that make sense even to people who never wanted to know how money launders itself clean. Jenny keeps threading the needle between outrage and verification, cutting from the ledger to dated photos of men in suits at the shack, to a map graphic a producer builds in real time that shows how properties leapfrog through trusts like children playing a game no one else was invited to join. She reads the words without italicizing them because she knows the audience will do that for her at home. My phone vibrates with a caller ID that doesn't believe in names, and I make myself breathe before thumbing to accept, before setting the handset on speaker where the camera can hear the temperature of his voice. Richard starts with posture you can feel through a cell tower, the reassurance of a patriarch patient with a hysterical daughter-in-law, And then he pivots to moral arithmetic as if the ledger were a ledger of sins we all share. He says the town was broke before they intervened, that they financed scholarships and hospital wings and after-school programs, that men like his father made hard choices, and the rest of us benefited in sidewalks and lower crime, and the feel of safety that lets you walk your dog after dark. He calls it stewardship, calls it a tradition of guardianship misunderstood by people who never had to make payroll for a whole city. Jenny doesn't give him the comfort of a debate without receipts. She asks which donation bought which judge's favorable ruling. She asks whether the scholarship fund was also the account that paid an enforcer's mortgage after a contractor disappeared. She asks whether he can explain why my name appears as an acquisition 3 years before Marcus met me at a fundraiser where, on camera, Richard shook my hand like he'd never seen me and told me I reminded him of his mother. When he calls my husband's death tragic, I hear the click of Jenny's pen against the desk, and when he says sometimes families must act to protect legacies, the comments section goes feral in a way that crosses politics because everyone recognizes the way money dresses itself as providence. Outside the glass wall of the newsroom, sirens arrive without hurry, the measured procession of vehicles that belong to people who don't need to apologize for showing up late. State police park nose to nose with the black SUVs as if they are mirrors. Uniforms step out with that stillness that suggests the script changed upstairs. Then dark jackets with yellow letters on the back take the stairs 2 at a time, not dragging anyone yet, just occupying oxygen, checking exits, studying camera angles because somebody somewhere authorized the word federal, and the building exhales like it's been holding smoke. A producer whispers that the governor's office just retweeted the stream with the word integrity, and suddenly the momentum that felt like a teetering ladder begins to feel like a ramp. My phone buzzes again. Not a call, but a text that arrives without the punctuation of a full stop and still lands like a period. Well played. Your husband would be proud. The rest of the evidence is en route to federal authorities. J.Ev. I show it to Jenny, who tilts the screen toward the camera for a beat too long to be accidental. And in living rooms across the county, some people gasp because they know those initials from the unsolved section of the local history they tell at barbecues, while others shrug and say coincidence out loud to hear what it sounds like when fear tries to sound rational. I don't know if the message is from a dead man or his shadow, but I know it means we are not alone in this, which is a sentence that tastes like water after days of metal. The phones on the metro desk ring with sources who have waited years for someone else to say it first. A clerk who filed deeds she didn't believe. A janitor who emptied shredders and pocketed curls of paper with names that made him nervous. A retired detective who was told to stay in his lane and now wants to talk about a case that never let him sleep. Jenny keeps her tone even as she reads out a list of properties and dates like a roll call, and the live chat floods with neighbors who worked those jobs, who knew a cousin, who watched a storefront change hands overnight for a price that wasn't market so much as message. My body remembers to shake only when the glass doors at the far end of the library wing open with quiet deliberation, the kind of entrance professionals make when they already own the room in their minds. 3 men in suits cross the threshold without rush, their shoes silent on the carpet, their expressions bland in the way expensive counsel cultivate to look like gravity and not threat. The tallest smiles like a concierge and says he represents interests who would prefer to resolve this without further disruption. He gestures toward a conference room as if the space were neutral and not a stage, and tells me they have an offer that will recognize my unique position and compensate my cooperation handsomely. I step toward them because I need to hear the price they've put on my life, and because a camera is rolling, and because the only way out of a trap, this old, is to walk through the middle of it with the world watching. In the courthouse hallway, a maintenance man lunges with a knife, the 3rd attempt this week, and that night Tom knocks wearing Tom's face. By afternoon, the courthouse smells like toner and lemon cleaner, the ordinary fragrance of bureaucracy that should make me feel safe. It doesn't. The clerk stamps my petition to freeze transfers on properties tied to the shell companies, and I am thinking about whether the paper sounds loud when it hits the tray, when a shape detaches from a column and crosses the tile with that too even cadence I've learned to fear. He wears coveralls, carries a mop bucket, and smiles with the flattened politeness of someone who's memorized a scene. The metal flashes before the motion resolves, the blade a slim triangle angled for the space under those ribs! And I only live because Melissa steps from behind a pillar like an answer and breaks his arm with a crack that echoes. The knife skitters across the marble, a comet with no tail, and security arrives slowly, as if time itself is bribed. By the time they cuff him, his eyes are flat with training, and when he says I'm a public menace, the clerk's hands begin to shake in a way that makes me want to apologize for surviving in front of her. Agent Coleman argues again for a safe house with triple doors and men who don't smile. But I nod and sign and keep my schedule, because if I retreat now, the story becomes a cautionary tale instead of a prosecution. Dusk folds the town into purples and sodium, and I take my coffee at the kitchen sink like I can rinse dread down the drain. Elena texts a picture of takeout and a heart to remind me we still have civilian rituals, and Tom promises to swing by after a job to swap locks at the shack because we're past symbolism and into hardware. When the knock comes a little after 10, it is Tom's cadence, Tom's whistle through his teeth, Tom's weight on the porch that makes it creak in the second board from the left, and I open because habits kill more slowly than knives. The face that smiles is Tom's only the way a wax museum smile is a smile. The eyes are a little too dry, and the lips don't rest in the corners like his, and by the time my brain finishes the sentence, a gloved hand seals my mouth and the world tilts into black. I come back to fluorescent hum and the sweet stink of gasoline layered over oil and damp dust, the olfactory signature of places where things are taken apart and sometimes not put back together. My wrists bite against zip ties looped to a metal chair, and the concrete room has no windows, only a painted cinder block wall with a rectangle of darker paint where something once hung. A camera winks above the door. A woman sits across from me like a throne arrived before the court. Patricia, posture immaculate, hair arranged with battlefield precision, eyes offering an obituary's level of sympathy. She doesn't greet me so much as hold up a phone whose screen already knows what I will do. Elena and Tom are bound to chairs in a different room, duct tape bright as punctuation against their cheeks. Their eyes are furious, the special kind of rage reserved for people who have been used as leverage. Patricia's voice is a velvet rope around a pit. She tells me civilization runs on signatures and introduces a folder that smells faintly of perfume and printer ink. The first document transfers title of the historic holdings back to a foundation that wears Joseph Fisher's name like a benevolent mask. The second is an affidavit in which I recant, confess confusion, blame grief for wild allegations. The third appoints a trustee to manage my interests, which is to say, erase them. She lays a pen across the top page like a wand. Power sits differently on women who had to fight other women to keep it. She narrates the stakes in a tone that would have soothed me once. Sign and your sister and her fiancé go home to plan a wedding. Refuse and we attend 2 funerals with closed caskets because gasoline is not kind. I want to be brave in a way that would make good television, but terror is a physical thing, a humming wire through muscle. I make myself breathe and look at tiny details because focus is oxygen in rooms like this. A faint smear of ash on Patricia's cuff, a scuff on the toe of her shoe, the way the phone feed pulses when a figure passes behind Elena, only half seen, a shadow that does not belong to the guard in the frame. I uncap the pen and buy 5 seconds with slowness, tracing the curve of my first initial as if muscle memory could make a different life appear. Patricia leans forward to watch victory take shape, the way you watch a cake rise through the oven door glass. The lights go out. Not a flicker, not a surge, total eclipse. In the brief blank that follows, the room breathes like a beast, and I hear a baton's sweet, heavy syllable fine bone. Emergency floods snap to red, the color of exit signs and bad endings, and Patricia lies sprawled with the impersonal surprise of someone who always believed gravity worked for other people. Melissa looms over her with a compact baton, and a heartbeat you can hear from across a room because adrenaline makes its own drum. Hands on my wrists, a quick slice, and the blood rush back hurts like relief often does when it's honest. The camera overhead blinks stupidly and then dies, and in the corridor outside, voices braid into urgency. Melissa moves with mercenary economy, a geometry of competence that turns corners into allies. We navigate a maze of storage bays and corridors where light gathers in puddles and shadows wear boots. Every turn smells of solvents and rubber and something chemical that sits low in the throat. We find Elena and Tom bound in a room that looks like a set dress for a kidnapping. Two guards slouching with the carelessness of men who believe the countdown will always favor them. Melissa puts rounds into shoulders and knees, efficient, merciful by her standards, and I pull tape from my sister's mouth and almost cry at the sound she makes when free air hits her lungs. Engines arrive outside with an eagerness that doesn't feel like rescue. The first wave through the sidewall wears matte black uniforms with no insignia and helmets that make their faces generic, corporate soldiers purchased by the hour. They breach with a concussive swagger, and the air fills with gypsum dust and hot metal smell, and Melissa curses because she recognizes the brand of trouble money buys when it has run out of lawyers. Patricia's voice slithers back over an intercom speaker hung somewhere above us, uninjured now by tone, if not by body, ordering a protocol she calls Simply Burn. The lights along the floor wink alive in parallel lines, and then fire shows us worms. Accelerants run like veins. The first tongues of it lick the corridor baseboards with greedy tenderness, and the air changes temperature on a sentence, the way a fever declares itself. We move like chess pieces in a blitz, following Melissa through a route she must have seen in blueprints or dreams. Tom shoulders a rolling tool chest against a door to buy seconds. Elena carries a bundle of documents she snatched because old habits die slower than their owners. She has always been the child who saved report cards and birthday cards, and now she is saving proof. Smoke thickens into something with fingers, invisible hands across mouths and eyes, and the world shrinks to the radius of the person ahead of you, and the promise that your feet know how to follow. Heat crawls into the soles of my shoes, and the fire mutters like a crowded bar. Behind us, something structural complains in a deep register, a moan that predicts collapse without saying when. We hit a dead end where a loading door has been chained from the outside, padlocked twice in a pattern that says someone with a manual expected us. Melissa scans for a workaround and finds only brick, and the heat pushes at our backs with the slow authority of a tide. Elena coughs into her sleeve. Tom swears and pries at the chain with a borrowed crowbar, and manages only sparks. The smoke shifts, and an opening writes itself in the haze, a darker dark resolving into movement against the light. A figure steps toward us from the corridor where the fire hasn't yet learned to breathe, the gait wrong for a stranger, the tilt of shoulders and ache I recognize before my mind gives me a name. He lifts a hand not in surrender but in recognition, and the voice that threads the distance is the one that read vows and told jokes, and once warned me away from this very place. Through the smoke, a man moves toward us with a familiar gait, and in the stuttering light I see Marcus. "You're supposed to be dead," Agent Coleman says, her stance squared, her weapon low but ready. Marcus doesn't flinch. "Can we discuss that after you arrest my mother?" In the field office, the air conditioning hums too cold for a body that just outran fire. Soot has mapped itself along my sleeves, and Elena keeps rubbing a streak on my cheek the way she used to when we were kids, as if friction alone can erase what we've seen. Marcus sits opposite me, cuffed to a chair because procedure is polite until proven otherwise. He looks like a man whose body remembers the weight of a wedding ring it no longer wears. Anger, love, betrayal. Each has a seat at this table, and none offers to get up. Agent Coleman's gaze cuts between us, professional, not unkind, lined with the fatigue of someone who has missed too many dinners because justice is always late. Marcus asks for his attorney and, almost as an afterthought, for a Department of Justice liaison. He recites a case number and a memorandum of understanding I don't recognize. It sounds theatrical until Coleman places 2 quick calls and his fable turns into paperwork. The speakerphone transforms the room into a conference of disembodied authority. First, a DOJ supervisor who confirms a cooperation agreement signed last month. Then the U.S. Attorney's Office acknowledging conditional immunity in exchange for ongoing intelligence on the Whitmore Network's surviving arms. Coleman presses her lips together in a line that means, "I hate being surprised," and unlocks his cuff. The metal's soft clink is indecently intimate. I want to ask where he slept, what name he used, whether he practiced dying in mirrors before he left me to learn grief in real time. Instead, I ask the question that matters now. Why here? Marcus doesn't look at me as he answers, because too much eye contact could undo both of us. "The Syndicate's endgame is a document," he says, "not a bullet. The deeper vault under the shack holds the originals, the incorporation papers, the deeds predating fraud, the instrument that gives shell companies the right to breathe. Destroy those in legal arguments thinned to smoke. Keep them intact, and the empire dissolves along the same lines it once claimed it. Burn or bury is the last resort, and they're out of subtlety. Coleman shifts into logistics. If the site is the cornerstone, the site becomes the battlefield. She orders a perimeter, local units for traffic, state police for outer control, FBI for the inner ring. The radio chatter multiplies, a beehive of acronyms. Melissa, patched in from a med check, offers a tactical overlay. Known ingress from the East Service Road, blind corners along the tree line, a flat stretch perfect for vehicles that need a straight run to escape. Tom, now bandaged and breathing like a man who intends to marry as scheduled, points out old drainage culverts that might serve as tunnels. We draw a war map over a satellite print of my inheritance. The convoy rolls with a theater that reassures the public and lures the desperate. Lights, sirens, the thump of helicopter rotors carving the dark. As we crest the last hill, the shack sits in the clearing like a stage set, familiar and wrong. Floodlights throw hard angles. The vines are silvered into something almost beautiful. Boards gape like teeth. And all around, men in dark clothing move with agency. Daniel Morrison stands at the point, the bespoke lawyer now in a ballistic vest that fits like it was tailored to his ambition. His voice rides a megaphone with the oily confidence of someone who has never had to shout to be heard. The structure is wired, he says. Explosives are placed. Approach equals detonation. Approach equals everybody's headline. We take positions in a geometry of risk. Local officers anchor the roadblocks. State troopers stack their cruisers into a wall that photographs well. The FBI sets a command post in a mobile van that smells like coffee and caution. Coleman negotiates by radio and gets only rehearsed lines. Marcus watches the shack the way a son studies a house he grew up in and does not miss. He asks for 5 minutes with Daniel. Coleman says absolutely not. Melissa says she'll shoot his kneecap if he tries to play martyr. I say nothing because I have learned that if you love someone in a war, you don't tell them what to do in front of the people who might kill them. Marcus walks anyway. No vest, hands open. The floodlights catch the ash in his hair and the sweat along his temples and make him look both younger and older than 35. Daniel calls him prodigal, a biblical insult wrapped in civility, and laughs when Marcus says there's a way out that doesn't end with body bags and headlines. Marcus talks like a hostage negotiator who knows the hostage taker's bedtime routine, offers a path for Daniel to step sideways into cooperation, a future where a lawyer can become a witness with a book deal. Daniel smiles like a man who doesn't read redemption arcs. Family creed beats American compromise, he says. Power is an inheritance, not a policy. I taste copper, that old penny's smell again, as wind shifts and pushes the shack's breath toward me. The wood is dry enough to remember every summer. The foundation yawns where frost heaves stole the level. The porch tilt whispers that gravity is impartial. Coleman murmurs into her shoulder mic and snipers adjust, their scopes making tight circles on a man's chest no one actually wants to kill. Elena grips my hand so hard I feel bone. Melissa watches Daniel's hands, not his face, because she has been trained by truth more than testimony. Daniel invokes the town, the jobs, the donations, the scholarships named after men who laundered honor the way they laundered money. He asks the cameras, because of course there are cameras, to pan wide so America can see what vigilantism looks like when it puts on a badge. Marcus doesn't rise to it. He keeps his voice even, talking through the calculus that matters. The vault below holds originals with wet signatures. Their loss will not restore his father's dynasty. Their survival will dismantle it in a way that courts respect and history remembers. He says he can walk Daniel through the paperwork that buys him a future. Daniel's jaw tightens, and I see the moment he chooses the explosion over the footnote. A tremor ripples through the crowd. It begins with one of Daniel's men faltering, his rifle dipping an inch, then two more turning their heads not toward Marcus or the perimeter, but toward a busted window where a shadow should be. A shape resolves inside the shack, lit from behind by a portable work light someone forgot to kill. The profile is famous in a way that belongs to dead men. Jawline clean, hairline uncompromised by time. Suit too fine for this place, yet somehow right. The air changes temperature, or maybe that's just the moment belief leaves the body. Joseph Fisher stands in the broken window like a photograph that has learned to breathe. For a heartbeat, the clearing forgets how to be violent. Guns hesitate mid-aim. Radios forget to crackle. The helicopter beats air into silence. Daniel's face drains to a color that looks expensive. My skin remembers the photos from the cellar. The smiling men with champagne. The date scrawled on the back in a hand I now recognize. Is it a projection? A double? A man wearing another man because masks are a family language? Or is it the idea of him? The kind of apparition a town summons when truth finally outruns fear? The answer will matter later. Now it freezes hands, and I see Daniel's thumb slide toward a transmitter taped beneath his vest, the kind of thumb that loves dead man switches because they love company. The apparition lifts its hand, not a threat, not a wave, just enough to hold every eye an instant longer, and in that held breath, Daniel's thumb finds the switch. You can contest copies, but you can't argue with original deeds inked before a single shell company or gift existed. Daniel's thumb moves, but Patricia moves faster. She breaks from the flank like a matador stepping into her own bull, a pistol glittering in floodlight, hair perfect even with dirt in it, the kind of woman who rehearses cruelty until it looks like poise. 3 shots rip the clearing. Her first hisses past my ear and punches breath out of the night. Melissa's second takes Patricia high in the shoulder, spinning her. Marcus's third snaps her wrist, the gun ricocheting into the weeds with a metallic gasp. Agents surge. Patricia screams, not with pain so much as with refusal, a sound that insists the world rewrite itself around her will. EMTs strap her to a board while she spits threats like teeth, and even strapped down she manages to look offended by the oxygen mask. The moment breaks the spell around the shack. Daniel's men falter, zip ties replace bravado, detonators come off bodies like ugly jewelry. Coleman's voice returns to command pitch, and I realize I've been holding my breath against the possibility of becoming confetti. When the last rifle is grounded and the perimeter holds steady, she turns to me. If there's a deeper vault, we go now. I nod, because this is why I was left a ruin, a weapon disguised as an insult. We descend a ladder through warm air that smells like damp wood and old lies. The concrete cellar looks smaller than I remember, as if fear once made it larger, as if evidence has gravity and pulls the room inward. Marcus kneels at a seam in the floor I'd mistaken for a crack. He presses his palm against a rough oval set into the concrete, then looks up at me with a question that touches the edges of everything that broke and might be repaired. Blood, he says quietly. It calibrates on lineage. Coleman raises a brow, not because she doubts, but because she catalogs, then nods for me to proceed. I bite the inside of my cheek until iron comes, press my thumb to the oval, and the onsuijitsu. Concrete shudders. The seam yawns, a hatch grinding open with the long sigh of a secret that has waited too long to speak. Below, a second chamber unfolds. Steel ribs, archival drawers, humidity control blinking green, and the hush of good paper sleeping. I step down into history and feel my pulse settle into its cadence. At the center waits a bound ledger and a thinner book wrapped in oilcloth. The ledger is the map of crimes we already snatched from Shadow. The thin book is a journal that carries Joseph Fisher's neat, impatient hand. I skim and then force myself to read line by line because shortcuts are how you miss the edge that cuts you. He writes about watching a town get mortgaged to vanity, about a circle of men who wore philanthropy like perfume, about realizing that courts and cops could be taught to hum to the same metronome. He writes about insurance that isn't money, a vault keyed to blood, a trigger that will only respond to a descendant, so the syndicate must keep the descendant alive long enough to use her, and that living key, if she chooses, can reverse the long con with a single day of sunlight. We open drawers. Original deeds stare back at me with the serene authority of wet signatures from the 70s and 80s. My mother's maiden name in ink older than my marriage, notaries who retired to Florida decades ago, legal descriptions precise enough to walk with a measuring wheel. Corporate charters appear in stacks that predate every shell, trust instruments that predate every gift to cronies who called theft development. Coleman calls for a high-speed scanner and an evidence photographer. A team in Tyvek flows in with gloved reverence, laying paper on a clean grid, shooting from overhead, marking chain of custody tabs in a ritual that reads like prayer. She puts a phone to her ear and says the words I wanted someone in America to say on my behalf. We have originals, we have wet ink, we have the kill shot. I feel it like weather shifting, how law moves when asked with the right documents in the right order. Originals restore title. Fraud unravels upstream. Liens collapse when the root instrument is void. Restitution mechanisms wake from hibernation. Disgorgement, constructive trust, claw back statutes that look dry until they're pointed at $1 billion of other people's lives. Melissa leans her hip against a file cabinet and smiles with the small, vicious relief of a woman who has been outnumbered and isn't anymore. Tom whistles, then catches himself, then whispers sorry to the paper like it's sacred. We move methodically, duplicates for court, certified sets for the recorder's office, a sealed bundle for the state AG, a scanned package uploaded to federal servers that do not live in any one building, each new redundancy a stitch in a net big enough to hold a falling city. Coleman's texts snap a tamper-evident seal across the vault door and log the time down to the second. When we climb, out, the sky is paling. Dawn has the indecency to be beautiful. That night, I sit across from Marcus at the table where he once slid a ring toward me and asked for a future I didn't know was scripted. The restaurant lights are softer than memory. The server recognizes us and pretends not to. The wine sits between us like a pack still to be drafted. We talk without touching the escape hatch of jokes. He explains the months of dead man drops and burner phones, the way immunity papers feel both like absolution and blackmail, the requirement that he remain legally dead because resurrection complicates prosecutions. I explain what grief does when it has no grave and only a ledger, how it rearranges a house and then a spine, how it can be weaponized into focus. One chance, I say. No more myth-making, partners, not fairy tale. He nods, and for once he doesn't argue the definition of partner. He asks about the community center I've sketched on napkins and legal pads in equal measure. I tell him I want a clinic, job training, tenant legal aid, a scholarship that doesn't require anyone to shake the hand of a man who bought his name on a building. He says he can help raise additional funds as nobody, which may be his first true freedom. We leave without touching because promises are fragile things, and hands, once clasped, remember. The first credible attempt lands the next morning, proof that paper hurts men who thought violence was always the tidy answer. I'm at the courthouse filing quiet title actions when the clerk's eyes widen at something behind me, and I turn toward a maintenance uniform that has been altered just enough to hide a blade, toward a face I will later realize belongs to nobody real. Melissa takes him down so fast the knife sings across marble, and everything echoes with the reality that a war doesn't end because the vault opens. It ends when the people who built a kingdom on theft learn that sunlight will live here now, with or without them. As the cuffs ratchet and my heart staggers back into rhythm, my phone buzzes with a number I've never seen, and a voice I've only heard in the margins of ledgers. Nice work, Mrs. Whitmore. Ready for the next move? Sign the NDA for $2.8 billion and walk. Daniel smiles, as if I'm a signature away from forgetting the dead, while federal vans idle outside with their open doors breathing cold air and consequence. They bring him in cuffed but polished, like he woke up and chose indictment chic, hair crisp, suit unrumpled, the kind of defendant who thinks posture is a legal argument. The conference room we commandeered in the federal building smells like old carpet shampoo and cardboard, and outside the window a row of blue-lit vehicles hums on low idle, the patience of institutions finally awake. Daniel's tablet glows with the offer, non-disclosure, global release, wire instructions that read like a fantasy novel. He tries the tone he used the first day in the Zahnärztest library, practiced reason shaped to sound like mercy. Walk away, keep the money, let the professionals mop up history. Coleman doesn't bother to sit. She recites the crimes we filmed in the ledger and adds the federal counts I hadn't considered. Transport, conspiracy, RICO predicates that braid separate sins into a single rope. And with each charge, Daniel's smile thins until it becomes a tick. When she's finished, he taps the tablet dark and says he hopes I enjoy depositions, because he intends to make my life very long and very public. Melissa sits against the wall under a poster urging agents to safeguard evidence, and when Daniel leaves, she finally tells the whole truth without hedging. Former bureau, yes, and not just a burnished resume line. She had a badge, a partner, and a funeral that sat on her chest like a cinder block because a Judge Daniel helped groom signed the warrant that got a good man killed. James recruited her. Marcus vouched, and she slipped back into the syndicate, not as temptress, but as anesthesia, a needle that goes where the blood is. The day she chose my safety over staying deep, she knew she was burning the last of her cover, and she doesn't want a podium or a medal ceremony, only the road, the list, and permission to keep cutting until the Hydra runs out of heads. She leaves me a locker key, a handwriting ugly note with 3 names, and the first of the postcards that will arrive without return addresses, a rusted water tower against a Midwestern sky, and the single word handle scribbled on the back. Coleman builds a command spine across state lines like she's laying track ahead of a train. Subpoenas fly on e-filing waves. Sealed indictments open in staggered time zones. Field offices trade names like playing cards and then stop playing. The arrests roll beyond our map of familiar corruption into cities where the same charities bought the same absolutions and the same contractors learned the same habit of billing twice and paving once. Watching The Purge is like learning a language by immersion. How a U.S. attorney phrases forfeiture so a judge will sign without giving defense counsel a toehold. How a state AG asserts parens patriae to claw back grant funding stolen by a foundation with too much glass and not enough receipts. How investigators choose which domino to tap. So a developer calls his lawyer, and the lawyer calls the DA, and the DA calls a friend in private practice who flips before breakfast. My phone becomes a dashboard of reassignments and resignations. The bench changes its robes. The Chamber of Commerce finds a new anthem. 3 city council members suddenly realize the word interim is not an insult. The map we build on the wall in the war room isn't about bodies. It's about money finding the easiest downhill route. Colored string runs from the vault documents to land banks, then to TEF districts with boundaries drawn like Rorschach blots, then to shell companies with nature names and vacancy mailboxes, then to contracts that pretended to be competitive while being anything but. Jenny camps on a rolling chair and turns my messy narrative into a canon of public record. Long-form episodes with cold opens that make strangers in grocery lines talk to each other. Interactive charts where you can click a parcel number and watch 30 years of fraud dissolve. Interviews with retirees who finally say on camera why the park they were promised turned into a parking lot. She records my voice reading portions of Joseph's journal and overlays them with footage of the buildings that used to belong to him and now belong to me and will belong to the town again. Her series changes the argument from whether the syndicate existed to what restitution looks like when theft is this thorough. Elena and Tom hold me to earth. They cook. They make me sit on the porch and listen to the stupidly ordinary sound of sprinklers. They tell me when I'm wearing exhaustion like a badge and when I need to call the therapist whose number I've been ignoring because I keep pretending competence is the same as healing. Tom, who once measured studs and doubted ghosts, now helps Coleman's team photograph crawl spaces and mark false walls, a craftsman turned forensic docent. Elena takes the calls I can't and files the forms that would otherwise eat my sleep. She carries pepper spray and a whistle even in daylight. She makes lists and then lights them on fire on the back steps as ritual. We learn safety in layers, not the bunker kind, but the public kind. Neighbor groups, business owners, teachers who refuse to let a city forget what it learned. The offers keep arriving like junk mail painted in gold leaf. A lobbyist tries to float a compromise in a steakhouse booth where the waiter has memorized too many politicians' cocktails. A venture fund wants to partner on the community center in exchange for naming rights and a silence clause spun as brand alignment. An elder statesman knocks without an appointment and says, "Justice is noble, but fatigue is real. And if I sign a carefully drafted surrender, I can be the kind of rich that buys a town square and a private island." The amounts escalate as if money can measure my appetite for amnesia. I tell Coleman everything, and she tells the offers to the camera whenever a microphone is near, because sunlight is our one inexhaustible resource. The postcards keep coming, a motel sign with a letter burned out and the word close scrawled on the back, a strip mall where the payday lender's windows are papered over and the note reads evicted, a courthouse that looks like all courthouses everywhere, and the message finally, next coast. Melissa's handwriting is a talisman that says the hunt is still kinder than the speech. Not everyone changes costumes when the music stops. A judge resigns and calls it family time, while shredders hum. A former police chief moves 2 counties over and becomes a consultant. 80s. Developer with a yacht decides Europe has better light. Some fight and some fight dirty. A false affidavit lands on my doorstep wrapped in the Sunday paper. A surveillance van parks 2 houses down with men who pretend to check utility lines. A rumor blooms that I'm a grifter who found old paper and dressed it as justice. Jenny treats rumors like termites. She shows receipts and interviews the archivist, whose hands still smell faintly of dust and lemon oil. She makes the town look at itself without the soft filter. We set groundbreaking for spring because the ground needs to freeze and thaw and freeze again before we ask it to hold a new structure. The community center design board fills with ideas that aren't mine alone. A clinic on the first floor, a legal aid intake desk near the door, a trades training lab in back where sawdust will replace the smell of mold, a glass-walled archive where the originals will eventually live with climate control and school tours, and a plaque that does not use a single donor's name. The last loyalists do not RSVP. They gather their remaining nerve and their remaining C4 and decide their final sermon will be fire. The motion sensors at the shack ping awake after midnight, and the cameras I nearly didn't install catch the bow wave of 3 SUVs rolling without headlights, men stepping out in choreographed silence, one shouldering a satchel shaped like a sentence, another raising a drone that lifts into the dark like an angry moth. Diesel idles low, radios crackle on a private channel, and in the far trees a fourth vehicle sits with its dome light off, patient as a striker on the bench. By the time I see the first gloved hand testing the porch boards, I'm already dialing Coleman, already shoving my feet into boots, already hearing the shack's old bones answer with a groan that sounds unmistakably like a warning. They gave me a shack to humiliate me. I break ground on a community center to replace them. The morning we pour the first footer, the air tastes like cold metal and wet dirt, the sort of honest smell that doesn't lie about what it is. Excavators kneel like patient animals around the rectangle we have staked off, their buckets glinting as if they want to hold the future without denting it. I stand with a hard hat tucked under my arm, the same patch of ground where floorboards once argued with my weight now mapped in surveyor neon, and for a moment I hear the shack's ancient groan. Then the rumble becomes concrete, rolling in, a different music. We don't bless the site with a ribbon. We bless it with rebar and a permit number and the right names on the title. The sign reads Fisher Community Center, Health, Learning, Justice, and the fine print announces that the land is placed in a public trust, irrevocable, not for sale, not for barter, not for forgetting. After the siege night, the arrest came like a summer storm line, dark on the horizon, then sudden, hard cleansing. 212 taken into custody across 4 states in 8 days. Patricia, real and furious and uncoiffed, processed into federal prison with a medical file that will not bend sympathy into leniency. Richard, the man who practiced control until it looked like character, dropped in custody 2 weeks later, a heart that hoarded too much power finally refusing the weight. His obituary mentions philanthropy and omits me. Daniel flipped faster than his polished smile. In a sealed courtroom, he unspooled committees and shell companies and Saturday poker games where legal strategy tasted like bourbon, and when he finished, he signed a plea that turns his charm into documentary evidence. Melissa vanished in the only direction that made sense for her, postcards arriving like brushstrokes, a boarded courthouse with the words records rescued on the back, a coastal skyline with 3 names crossed out in indelible ink, a midnight diner with the caption still open. She chooses the hunt, not the podium, and I do not argue. Our relationship status is work, not myth. Marcus and I do not stage a second wedding. We stage conversations with the lights on. We keep separate apartments and a shared calendar. We trade passwords but not demands. We eat at the table where he once proposed and call it the table where we debrief. He tells me the parts of his training that still live in his bones, the way he sits with his back to a wall, the way he checks exits as reflex, the way love is not a weakness but a logistics plan. I tell him the parts of grief that still wake me at 3 a.m. The phantom funeral, the black SUV that isn't there, the quiet decision to choose sanity over spectacle every morning. Partners is the word we use because it holds law and tenderness at once. When he says I'm here, I hear the clause he doesn't speak. Until you tell me not to be. The center takes shape in layers that feel like policy and prayer. On the first floor, a clinic opens with sliding glass doors that hiss like whispers. The waiting room smells like lemons and dignity. A nurse from the neighborhood greets patients by name even when the chart doesn't. Down the hall, a legal aid desk comes from 9 to 7. Walk-ins welcome, the intake forms paired to questions that matter and none that hurt. In the back, the trades lab buzzes with saws and a teacher's voice that treats calloused hands as curriculum. Every graduate leaves with a union contact and boots they didn't have to borrow. Upstairs, a youth art studio stashes drums and canvases and a stage on wheels. A guidance counselor sits with kids who learn too early how to read a closed door. Next to the studio, the archive grows under glass, climate-controlled, alarmed, public. Joseph's ledger, the deeds, the photographs, a municipal memory that will not be rewritten by anyone's checkbook. Restitution is not a line item, it is a choreography. Funds seized under forfeiture law flow into a transparently tracked home. Account that pays for bus passes, eviction defense, small business grants conditioned on a living wage pledge, a scholarship that requires community service at the center and gives first-generation students something contracts used to steal. Choice. We post every dollar online with dates and vendor numbers. The town can click through and argue with us if the pattern ever looks like favoritism. Coleman says sunlight is policy, not metaphor, and I carry that sentence around like a tool. Jenny's long-form series seasons the country into caring. She doesn't tilt the camera for pity. She builds a through line from the first stolen parcel to the last clean check, and her voiceover makes complicated things feel legible without sanding off the sharp edges. She earns her prize and then refuses it to take a different assignment, insisting awards should never become insulation. Elena and Tom become my human ballast. They host cookouts on the lawn the shack once claimed like a scar. They hand out seed packets in spring. They refuse to let my life shrink to subpoenas and security briefings. They offer me the gift of slightly boring afternoons, the way Americans repair themselves one errand at a time. The difference between revenge and justice is time. Revenge is hot and impatient and wants the spectacle more than the solution. Justice is a slow machine that insists on receipts, service marks, appellate deadlines, a clean chain of custody, and a future. Revenge writes a slogan, justice writes a budget. I wanted revenge when I stood in that law office and felt the room enjoying my smallness. I wanted to tear something down so big that the sound would drown the petty laughter forever. What I learned is that the right demolition is legal, contracts voided in order, titles corrected in sequence, indictments layered so the appeals don't snap one spine and let the others stand. It is less cinematic and more permanent. And when young people walk past the center and say out loud to each other that it is theirs, I know permanence is possible. We hold a town hall on a Wednesday night and pack the auditorium until the ushers fold chairs like origami to make room. People who used to avoid microphones line up to speak. A woman whose father lost his house because a permit was misfiled now runs our zoning clinic. A man who paved streets twice on paper and once in fact apologizes without euphemisms and accepts the restitution plan that bears his name. When a heckler shouts that, "I'm only here because of bloodline luck," I agree, and then point to the org chart taped to the wall, to the board with term limits, to the budget with independent auditors, and to the line of kids in paint-splattered shirts waiting to show me their murals. Luck opened a door, policy keeps it from closing on someone else. On quiet nights, I walk the perimeter where porch boards once sagged and feel the ground answering with a steadier sound. The vines that used to claw the siding now. Climb a trellis seeded with flowers, community gardeners insisted were native. The old key sits framed in the lobby, rust flaking like the last lie, next to Marcus's note and a plaque listing names that did the hard parts without applause. I keep the wedding band in a drawer, not as a relic but as a weight I earned the right to set down. We're not done. There are more syndicates, more polite thefts dressed as progress, and while the center's doors are open, so are our eyes. And if your town has a worthless place with a story under it, would you seek revenge or justice? Tell me below and subscribe if you want the next chapter when it breaks. Drop your verdict in the comments, revenge or justice, and give me your 3-word reason. If you want the next chapter, hit like so, the algorithm knows to bring it to you. Subscribe and turn on the bell. New episodes drop every week, and you won't want to miss the fallout. Share this with one friend who'd dare unlock that shack. I'm pinning the sharpest theory. Top comment gets a shout out in the next episode.